Okay. So there's some debate as to what some of these dates are, but according to Pew Research Center, we have 5 generations that currently exist in today's workforce. We have the traditionalist, sometimes known as the, I'm trying to remember what that other generation was, the silent and greatest generation, or the traditionalist generation, and they're generally from 1925 to 1945, and they're currently 2% of our workforce. We have the baby boomers generation, born from 1946 to 1964, and they currently are 25% of our workforce generation. These are 2018 numbers, I believe. There's Generation X, 1965 to 1980, 33% of our current workforce. We have the Millennials from 1981 to 2000, 35% of our workforce. And then we have Generation Z, born from 2001 to 2020, and they're currently 5% of our workforce. So if you all want to take some time on the chat feature to let us know what generation you're a part of, that helps us give a little demographic. Although I don't, that would be great. Next slide, please. So one of the pieces in doing some research for this that kind of came up is not only do we want to talk about the differences, but we also want to talk about ways in which we can help the generation gap be less of an obstacle to getting things done, and figure out ways that to facilitate us all working together. That first piece that we think is really important is understanding why we do what we do as generations. And the next few slides go through each of the pertinent, or the most, the generations with the most numbers in the workforce. We didn't use the traditionalist generation here, but we have baby boomers. Baby boomers were shaped by the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, Watergate, and they're known to want advancement through hard work and long-term tenure. They look for job security, structure, and stability. And the reasons they like this is because they were the largest population of war veterans and those with military experience. So they're pretty used to hierarchy and following the rules and working your way up. They're hardworking and consumption-oriented. They grew up during the instability and scarcity of the Great Depression. They believe that people must pay their dues and that age equals experience. The biggest technological developments for them in their childhood were television and telephones. Next slide, please. Generation X, the latchkey kids. I'm part of Generation X, and we want much of the same as the baby boomers, but we're also looking for more work-life balance. And the reason for that is because we grew up watching our parents, who were boomers, work hard, but still get laid off due to market or industry shifts. And we decided maybe it shouldn't all be about work. We were the first generation to regularly have 2 parents in the workforce. That makes us independent and self-reliant. We tend to be flexible and adaptive as we act as the bridge of the workforce between baby boomers and the younger generations. Our biggest technological developments in childhood was the rise of computers. I remember starting my freshman year in high school and doing typewriter classes, A space, A space, A space. And by senior year, I was doing a basic programming class. So that was definitely right as I was in high school that computers were coming along. Next slide, please. Millennials want flexibility and to challenge the norms. Society and technology started changing really quickly during their childhood. Parenting styles of the Gen Xers were much more nurturing than authoritative because we didn't want to make the mistakes that our parents made as Gen Xers. So that led to a generation that responds to positive feedback and wants to provide input. Society during the growing up of millennials, society definitely placed an emphasis on keeping up with the Joneses. There was a rapid rise in national wealth. The philosophy of we can have it all and we want everything without sacrifice and in less time kind of became the norm. Millennials grew up during the rise of the internet. That gave them plenty of access for information that previous generations didn't have or understand how to get. So they have a thirst for knowledge and they often ask why. which can be perceived by as disrespect by people from earlier generations, but they're just asking why. Social media use became prevalent. This led to their desire to be collaborative. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the Gen Zers. They want much the same as millennials. They grew up, they don't remember a time without technology. That makes them very tech savvy and connected. They grew up swiping an iPad and are the first generation that was raised with smartphones. So they don't remember what it was like not to be able to get anything you wanted off of your telephone that was in your pocket. They've been raised with businesses such as Uber, Airbnb. They see how easy it is to be entrepreneurial in this world. So that's something they strive to be. They're the last generation that is likely to be the majority white. Their diversity is second nature to them, and they feel overwhelmingly positive about it. And then student loans and that drive for success make them more likely to put off traditional family roles. Is that my last slide, or is there one more?
That's the last one.
That's the last slide. All right. So that's a little bit of information about each generation and what makes them do what they do, why, and hopefully that facilitates a bit of an understanding between the generations that will help foster some communication and collaboration that maybe we wouldn't otherwise have. We need to make sure we do some communication, some understanding, some flexibility to really work towards a gap, bridging that generation gap. As we talk to our pairs, we'll hopefully have them giving us some strategies for working towards the two-way, bridging that gap. Identifying some similarities and some differences, but also some strategies to make sure that we can communicate and work well as a team in a multi-generational workplace. So that being said, we're going to hop right into our pairs questions. And let me see, I'm going to grab this. Our first pair is Shannon Monroe Davis, who is a Generation X person, and Kirsten Mitchell, a millennial. So Shannon, I'm going to hand off to you your first question, which is, what is the most valuable thing you have learned from a coworker who was older than you? And what have you learned from one who was younger than you? Shannon.
Oh, hi there. Thanks, Gina. So as Gina said, I am Shannon Monroe Davis. I am a proud Gen Xer.
Yeah.
Of operations at USource. We're an energy consulting company that's part of the NextEra Energy family of companies. One generational difference that I've noticed is what I like to call job hopping. So staying at a company no more than 2 or 3 years. That's not only okay now where it wasn't in prior generations. Companies are actually planning for it because we're expecting it now. So we're really starting to plan for that turnover. So to get to your question, a lesson that I've learned from someone older than myself is that regardless of how far you've climbed in your career ladder, whatever industry you might be in, it's never too late to change your mind about how you spend your days. So to kind of elaborate on that, that could mean literally changing what you do in your industry or even changing careers entirely. I knew an engineer who was at the top of his field, and he decided just what to me, as you know, a few years ago seemed literally like the spur of a moment decision. He left corporate America in his 50s and became a 5th grade math teacher. That to me was inspiring and really let me know that, wait a minute, if I'm really not happy where I am all day, every day, I can change what I'm doing. Nothing, just because my parents stayed at their jobs for 30 years doesn't mean that I have to look at the world the same way. So yeah, that's what I learned from someone older than I am.
That's really, really interesting, Shannon, especially kind of the anecdote about your friend, an engineer who changed roles to be, you know, a 5th grade teacher. I think a lot of times it goes to how we define success. So someone
Yes.
look at an engineer and say, oh, you're much more successful than a fifth grade math teacher. But if the
Right?
person isn't happy, then that's not success to them.
Right. Money doesn't equal happiness to everyone. That is a lesson that I think, and again, it can always depend on, at least in my experience, it can depend on your parents and your family background. It can depend on, the challenges that you faced and what you see around you as to how you view success. Kirsten, what about you? What have you learned from someone older?
Yeah, so when I think about something very valuable that I've learned from someone older than me, the first thing that comes to my mind is a short and simple piece of advice that I got from our owner and principal here at Peterson Engineering, James Peterson. I guess I should introduce myself also. So I'm Kirsten Field, and I'm a mechanical engineer at Peterson Engineering, and we design high-performing buildings. One anecdote about something that I've noticed recently for a generational gap is, I think, underlined by the challenging time we find ourselves in. I find that my generation are very quick to hop on Google. If we have any software issue, any challenge that presents itself, I spend maybe 5 seconds trying to troubleshoot it before I open a Google search. And I've noticed other generations try their best to figure it out, and it can often lead to frustration. But to get back to your question, Shannon, James Peterson, our principal and owner, was explaining to me a meeting that he was going to. So in our line of work, we work to design buildings, and there's many stakeholders that are present in the design process. So as you can imagine, there's many opinions, and it can often lead to disagreement. As he was preparing for a meeting in which he expected there to be disagreement, he told me that his approach is always to start with the facts and establish a baseline. Hash out, this is our situation, this is what we understand about it, here's what we know, here's our unknowns, and then how do we move forward? I think oftentimes when you establish that baseline, you find that what might have been a disagreement was actually a misunderstanding. And even if that disagreement still exists and that difference of opinion, I think it's much easier to have a professional conversation between two parties who do disagree once the facts have been established and you have baseline trust between members of the team.
Absolutely. It definitely allows for egos and the need to be right, to be left at the door. And I think that's so important. So kudos to your boss.
Yeah.
Definitely leading the way in the right ways to communicate.
I think ego does have a lot to do with it. If you're not sure, you might think that the other person doesn't think that you understand. And by clearing the air that we all agree it's a yellow circle and a blue square that we're working with here, it makes it much easier to move forward.
Absolutely. So we were also asked, excuse me, about lessons from someone younger. And so for me, that one in a similar kind of vein was to never let someone, a boss, a coworker, a spouse, parent, friend, decide when you've peaked in your career. And that's actually happened to me and to some people around me over the years. And I think people easily get pigeonholed into a certain type of role or a very specific job type unless they speak up for themselves and talk about what they want to achieve. Nothing is ever going to change. And honestly, if you have the motivation to move up or take on more responsibilities, you're going to really want to make steps and make choices that are going to get you a little bit closer to the reality that you want to have. It may be scary. It may require changing companies or going back to school, but it's definitely something that everybody can do. And it is no one's place and no one has the right to tell you that you've peaked. You're done, you've done all you can do. That drives me crazy. But that is definitely something that it took someone about 10 years younger than me to go, wait a minute, you're doing that. And she was absolutely right. And I am back in school getting my master's degree. So
Well, congratulations. But yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Miss Millennial? What have you learned from someone younger?
yeah, so it's interesting when we were preparing for this, Shannon thought it might be hard for you to think of something you've learned from someone younger than you, but it was actually pretty easy. So for us, over the last 7 or 8 months that we've been working remotely, we've added quite a few new employees to our team. We've been very fortunate. Two of the employees that we've added are recent college graduates. So these are two people who left for spring break last year, thinking that 2 weeks later they'd be returning to campus, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. They never went back. They graduated remotely, started working for us, a combination of remotely and in the office at times for training purposes, and have adapted and been resilient through the entire process. So we've had software changes, we've had meeting structure changes, we've had changes in project teams at times, and their true adaptability and resilience has really shown through. And I learn from them every day.
That's great. I think that's a really great point. Shannon, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Kirsten if do you think that that's those individuals specifically, or is that something about your company that really makes it easy for them?
I think it's a little bit of both. So, these two individuals are tenacious and motivated and ambitious, and they're real go-getters. But also, we were very honest when they joined us. We've never onboarded remotely. We're used to working entirely in person. So it was new for everybody. And we led with that. And it was a very iterative onboarding process, and it still is. 5 or 6 months after they've started, where we're continually adjusting based on changing needs that they have and changing needs of the company.
Awesome.
Yeah, great. Those are great answers, ladies. Does anybody have anything they want to add about learning something that you've learned from somebody older than you or younger than you, besides the usual technical stuff that we learn? Feel free. Okay. Hearing none, or Laurel had something.
I do. I will add, in my career watching, I worked for a large electric utility, pretty conservative, safe company with really safe employees. And I don't mean safety in that way, but just cautious employees, thoughtful. And those that I learned, older than me, a few people older than me, learning by example in that their ability to do a great job regardless of the changes that were going around in the company around them, doing a great job, no matter if their manager changed in an instant or a reorg shifted, everything around them. And I think that was really a lesson for me on how to continue knowing, that you're safe, that you can do a good job, that your role in a team doesn't really matter who you report to or who you used to report to. It really matters, what's your contribution to that team and how do you continue to do that? So that was a good lesson, even though it wasn't something that was kind of overtly taught to me. It was just by observing other people.
Yeah, nice. Good. All right, well, we're going to move on to the next question. And the next pair that we have is Laurel. And we also, Laura Boyven and Brittany Angelo. And Laurel, we're going to throw this question first to you. And the question is, in your career, have you been subject to assumptions or stereotyping based on your age, or have you ever made assumptions based on age?
So this question had me questioning myself pretty deeply. First, let me tell you, I'm Laurel Boyven. I'm a baby boomer. But I'm as adaptable as a Gen Xer. I'm as open-minded as a millennial. I'm now an entrepreneur after a career in a safe environmental electric utility world that I had a 30-year career, and I 3 years ago quit without another job. So, that entrepreneur aspect of a Gen Xer, It's really interesting. I'm a late baby boomer, so I was born in '63, but I don't feel, I probably don't act like a baby boomer. Um, and the things I've noticed really in thinking about, have I ever been stereotyped or subject to stereotyping, or have I done it to others? I might be completely unaware that I was subject to it or that I did it, but I'm going to say no. I witnessed it in my career. I probably was subject to more stereotyping because I was a woman in a primarily male work world. But because of my age, I think I'm adaptable. I'm curious. I love learning from other people. I love interacting with other people. That being said, I have witnessed in my career, an employee who ended up retiring because he couldn't adjust or adapt to a reorg that resulted in his manager being a woman who was younger than his daughter. He had a really hard time with that. And it's a little bit complex. I don't know if it was because she was a female or because she was really younger than his daughter. And on the flip side, I have a younger employee, a younger male employee, a field technician who had a really hard time with his manager, who was very reminiscent of a father, right? So he had a hard time dealing with an older manager who he didn't understand. So I've seen it happen, but I don't think I've experienced it myself. And, thinking about being a younger manager, I managed a few employees in some positions that I was in. And as a manager, I had employees one who was older than me by 15 years and one who was younger than me by 10 years. But the three of us were we were a great team and really never, the age differences or the generation differences never impacted our work together. And I know my partner, Brittany, is in a situation, we had a great discussion about her being a manager and having employees who are older than her. So I'm sure her perspective is a little different than mine.
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Brittany Angelo. I do marketing at Revision Energy. Yeah, so this is a really interesting conversation, and Laurel touched on some key topics that I definitely want to bring forward. And I know that this is a group of all women, and I know we're talking about generational issues today, but I also do think that us all being in the energy industry gives us a little bit of energy environment industry. It gives us a little bit of insight into what it's like working in a male dominant industry. And I know that that is a lot of issues that Revision women have, and we're working heavily on adapting the industry in general, but just working towards how as women do we protect each other and uplift each other. And so I'm going to try to take the gender out of my answers, but stay generational with my answers. But as Laurel was mentioning, that I think a lot of older people have a hard time when younger people come up and are their managers. And a lot of my, I guess, like negative feedback that I'll say is from outside of Revision. My parents and my parents' friends, sorry, let me back up. I'm a millennial. So parents are baby boomers. A lot of them in the baby boomer generation always told me, oh, Brittany, you're never going to make it as a manager. You're too young. You don't have enough experience, yada, yada, yada. The list goes on. And it was crazy that all of these people that work in corporate America companies were so used to the older you are, the higher your rank is at the company. And I'm so proud to say that I found an amazing company that doesn't feel that way. Revision is a certified B corporation, which I live and breathe by benefit corporations. I just think that they're great for the planet. So ask me about that on another time. But Revision really protects its people and they care about their people. And one way that I see that is I've been working with the company for 4 years and they're not afraid to promote from within. And right away I was named a manager, and I do have some employees that work under me that are older than my parents. And I will say that there are some that have a little bit of issues with that, but for the most part, it's all about diversity and inclusion at Revision. And diversity and inclusion also means generational diversity and inclusion. So it's all about bringing your different thoughts to the table, bringing your different perspectives to the table. And I mean, I feel so lucky to say that the horror stories that I was told before I started at Revision, they are not true for me. I know that they are out there, but personally, I don't experience them. And I am so thankful for that.
That was one of the things that Brittany and I had talked about. And when I said that perhaps I wasn't aware if it happened to me, because I think there's a aspect of when you are focused on outcomes and you're focused on being open-minded, figuring things out, learning from other people, you may not experience some of the horror stories that Brittany heard, or I may have heard going into a particular job, and really focused on what you bring to the table and being able to admit you may not have all the answers and you might be able to learn from other people. You know, the ego, I think that Kristen, maybe you talked about ego, and Shannon, and removing the ego out of your contribution opens doors and provides opportunities. And Brittany, I'll work for you anytime.
I think the only other thing that I just want to mention is Laurel and I mean, we talked forever and it was awesome. And I'm so glad that I was able to meet you through this group. But we talked about making sure that no matter where you are in your life, you have confidence and you have confidence in who you are and you're authentically yourself with that confidence. And I think both generations, we saw that maybe our colleagues have a fear of being replaced by other generations. And I think that if you're true to who you are and you're confident with the ability that brought you to the table, then you're not going to be replaced. So just stick to your guts, stay confident in who you are and what you're doing, and you won't be replaced if that's the case.
And one of the things that in our conversation earlier, I mentioned that it's really interesting to me now that I'm a coach and I had this great career in legal, environmental, energy, and I then went into communications and community relations, which led me to coaching. And the fear of being replaced or being found out, that fear of someone might do it better. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. That imposter syndrome. Everyone has an ounce or a gallon of that. And by admitting that, you're a mere mortal, there might be opportunity for you to grow or learn something new and change. It removes the fear. If you can every day look at every interaction as an opportunity to learn something new. And it led us to a conversation about talking about that we as consumers, we all want the latest technology. We want the latest and best. Cars, phones, televisions, smart households. But we're intimidated by the latest and greatest younger, the next generation. And that was really interesting to me, that we want it in technology, but we might not want it in the workplace when it comes to people.
Interesting. Great conversation. Maureen had a comment that generational diversity is critical to a company. Experience, you get experience, but it pairs it with fresh perspective. So that's great. Does anybody have anything they want to add to to this conversation quickly before we move to the next question?
I think I'll add one other point, and especially I do think very strongly, and we definitely have it at USource. I work with Shannon, and we do have a multi-generational company, and we're actually starting to get, well, actually, I'd say we're about 50-50 male female too, which is pretty awesome to say. And we're also starting to add some cultural diversity. Hallelujah. It's in the energy industry, sometimes you just don't even see that, which shocks me. But I think too, it's very helpful when you're dealing with vendors or with clients, because as older folks, will understand where some people are coming from. Now I'm a boomer, but I was 1961, so I'm the same. I don't really relate to what I read a boomer's like, but I definitely feel, I've been in the work world for 35 or more years. So it helps, because you can, if I'm talking to someone that's 30 years younger than me, other than my kids, it helps me to have someone that I work with say, oh yeah, this is what we talked about when people, you get an email that starts with, hey. Well, 2 years ago, I'd be like, why would you say hey to start an email? But now I'm thinking, think about our parent, like my parents would have written a letter. It would have been, dear Mr. So-and-so, dear Mrs. So-and-so. And then mine got wicked casual, and we're like, hi, John, hi, and now it's, hey, guess what? That's just the progression. So yeah, it helps a lot to have different generations.
And I love Nikki's comment. She says she wants to add that her goal is to be replaced. There's not a fear of being replaced, but that's her goal.
Yeah, I guess I would just add, I've watched a lot of leadership and ownership transitions in my career. So I'm a Gen Xer and been in consulting on and off for 20 plus years. And that's a long story in and of itself. But I've watched a lot of people look behind them and go, oh my God, I don't know how this company is going to survive, right? Or, have to sell themselves because they didn't plan appropriately, either from an ownership perspective, but often it's a leadership perspective too. There's like a vacuum behind people. And I think that, that's reflects that fear that everybody mentioned. But it just has always been this like challenge to me. Like, I don't want to be that. I want to look behind me and go, oh, cool, I got awesome people. So I've always said that, if I win the lottery and decide not to come to work, I want to know my clients are okay. I want to know the business is okay. I want to just know that everything's going to go great when I go off and ride into the sunset. Literally.
I be your best friend by then.
All right. Well, we need to move along so that we get to all these great questions we have planned. So I'm going to axe that discussion and move on to our next pair, who is Caitlin Woods, a millennial, and Carrie Gilbert, who's a Gen Xer. And Caitlin, this question goes to you. When considering a job offer, what 1 or 2 benefits or perks are most important to you?
Yeah, this conversation is like one of the best conversations I've participated in a really long time. I'm so inspired, and I feel like I have so many different thoughts just based on everything that's been said so far. But I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Caitlin, and I work in media relations at Eversource. I started my career out of college as I worked in creative services at WMUR part-time, and I was waiting tables at night. So I would work at TV9, and then I would fly over to my waitressing job and barely make it on time, and worked on the weekends as well to make ends meet. Then I worked as a news reporter for about 6 years before I moved into communications with Eversource. And I think, like, in terms of differences I've seen among the generations, I think Laurel touched on this really beautifully when she talked about how she really can relate to the characteristics within each generation that we've been talking about. And I think that's really important to recognize, like when we're talking about communicating with the different generations and working together, like recognizing that generations aren't monoliths. And I think, you know, because generations go through shared life experiences, that's where some of those characteristics will come from. But everyone brings a different experience to the table. So you could have someone who you know, has the stereotypical characteristics of another generation. So I just think that's important to keep in mind. But in terms of like statistical generational characteristics, Gen Z, I think this is something to consider, is that Gen Z and millennials are less likely than older generations to consider themselves completely heterosexual. And Gen Z in particular is rejecting the gender binary. And this is according to Pew Research, the Pew Research Center. Today's teens are more gender non-conforming and gender fluid than previous generations. And that's something that they're going to be bringing into the workforce with them. And Gen Z is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation, and they're on track to be the best educated generation in the workforce. So as we're thinking about that, I think personally, what I look for from an employer is a really robust diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and programs that help to ensure that I and my colleagues feel safe to bring their whole self to work. And I think everyone in the conversation has been mentioning that along the way, but I think if you're looking at how to attract millennials and Gen Z, especially, you need to offer that diversity, equity, and inclusion. You need to be actively working to address and dismantle systemic racism, and you need to be making sure that your workplace feels safe for the LGBTQIA+ community. So I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then also flexibility is key. I think now, especially during the pandemic, I have two kids, 9 and a 7-year-old, and it's been really challenging. You know, the first several weeks were kind of like bleary-eyed trying to figure out how to navigate it, and then things got a little easier as we went along. But really, like, just having that check-in from my manager and saying, hey, how are you doing? I know that you've been trying to teach your kids remotely and, you know, do your full-time job and navigate a global pandemic. I think that having that recognition, like, an employer can't necessarily come over and provide childcare for you, but just those check-ins I think are really nice. And so I guess that would be the key, is flexibility. And I think pre-pandemic, there was a lot of conversation, especially among our young professionals at Eversource, about work from home, which I'm kind of chuckling now because everyone's working from home. Everyone that can work from home at Eversource is working from home. We actually surveyed the members of our Young Professionals Business Resource Group in 2019, and 80% of the respondents said they would like to work from home at least once a week, and 43% never worked from home. So now that we've had this huge shift, I don't know where we're going in the future once it's possible to be able to return to the workplace, but I do think a lot of companies are going to be thinking about making the work from home option part of their the way that they conduct this business moving forward. And I think that that will help to continue attracting and retaining young people who like that flexibility. And I know Carrie and I had a chance to connect before the conversation. And Carrie, I know that flexibility was something you were thinking about too.
Yeah, it was Caitlin. And similar to you, I have a 3-year-old. And so actually, even before the pandemic, was dealing with a need for more flexibility in my life. But then after, when he was home with me for about 8 weeks, and my husband and I were working from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. trying to fit in our jobs and taking care of a 3-year-old who really can't be, doesn't entertain himself ever, except when he's sleeping. Having a employer who is both understanding of the fact that we had a 3-year-old home and accommodating of flexibility. And actually, I was thinking after we talked, Caitlin, there was actually, I felt a need for some inflexibility as well. Like, if I'm going to set my day up around this meeting, you can't move it 20 minutes ahead of the meeting. No, you know, unless you have some pandemic related situation, but if it's just because, you know, you decided you wanted to have the meeting an hour later, that's not going to work for me anymore. So sort of I don't know if I want to add more balance to it, but more of a balance between flexibility and inflexibility. And I think in terms of looking for like what I'd be looking for in a new position, it would be that same kind of flexibility. But then some of the things that others have already talked about, I really liked what Caitlin said about diversity and inclusion. And I can't remember, someone said something earlier about, you know, including all generations and sort of the thought process going on at the company. I think that's really important. I think I know that's something we sometimes struggle with at Daymark, but not to say we're doing a bad job, but you know, like we're doing a strategic planning process now, and I think getting input from all levels of the company, there's really no one who couldn't add to that, and that's something I've enjoyed working at a small company, and that sort of there's been a lot of opportunities to get my voice heard in various things, and that would be something I'd be looking for in any kind of new environment as well.
That's great, ladies, and it's wonderful that Caitlin, you mentioned, and you, Carrie, too, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is the foundation and the substance of our fall FET for NEWIEE. That's you know what it's being billed as. We have a lot of speakers talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in this year's fall FET. So timely discussions that we're having regarding that. So that's all great. And one of the things that we talked about that I want to add to this discussion is that it seems kind of like you're saying, Carrie, and you too, Caitlin, is that this need to go with coronavirus to go virtual has kind of pushed us from the old way of doing business with, you know, button chair and everything like that to now we have to be virtual. So we've learned to kind of adapt and adopt that you know, younger generation mentality of how we do business.
And actually, one side benefit for me of going virtual is, so I work in an office of, actually, which no longer exists, but until March, I worked in an office of 3 people in Portland, Maine, and our primary office is in Worcester, which is a 3-hour drive one way, given the pretty much constant traffic on 495. Yeah. And so it was hard for me to get down there and really interact with our staff. But I found that since we've all been working remotely, it kind of puts me on a more even playing field. And so I've gotten a chance to, you know, I've been trying to take a chance to just chat with some of the people I don't normally talk to, which has been really nice.
Does anybody else have thoughts on this question about benefits and companies and that sort of thing?
I just want to add one more thing that Carrie and I had talked about. I think when you think about millennials and Gen Z being digital natives and always having feeling connected, I think something important also to consider is that because we've grown up always, you know, feeling responsive to work at all hours, that's not something that previous generations have had in the past, where their employer could reach them after 5 at home. So I think it's also important as a company to think about what ways can we set boundaries so that people have that feeling that when they go home, they can connect with their kids, connect with their partner, and everyone needs that for their own mental health. So like, is it necessary to send that email at 10, knowing that your employee is hardworking and is going to feel compelled to answer that email? So even if it's for tomorrow, if it's for tomorrow, then maybe send it tomorrow.
Good point.
So can I actually say something? Because I think this is where this discussion about differences in generations. So I am a boomer, but I've been a sales consultant, whatever you want to call it. And I've never known a normal work period. So don't assume that, and this isn't just directed at you. I mean, I'm just saying, don't assume that the older people don't understand that whole responding. Cheryl LaFleur was, Cheryl LaFleur, who was the chairman for FERC. She was our general counsel at New England Electric System. She would send all cap emails at 2 a.m. And you would get it like at, you'd start working at say 7:30, 8 o'clock. And, I'd work on projects at 10 o'clock at night. So no, we didn't have the smartphones, but we got on our computers and, after dinner and after the kids had had their tubs. So it's not always the same with generations. Definitely. There are some people that would never work after 4:30 at night, but not everyone. So I think that goes with this whole conversation, is we're all learning how we see different generations, and it's not always accurate, at least not for everyone.
Yeah. Agreed. We're gonna pop into our fourth pair. And for our fourth pair, we have our most experienced member, Muriel Robinette, and we have our youngest member, which is Haley Rustad. Muriel's a baby boomer and Haley's a Gen Zer. And Haley, this question is going to go to you first. What talents and strengths do you value and think are important in a manager?
Should I still introduce myself?
Absolutely.
So I'm Haley Rustad. I'm currently a freshman at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm currently undecided right now. I job shadowed at an environmental engineering firm my sophomore year at high school, and then had a small job at a different environmental engineering firm the summer after my senior year. One aspect that I do notice, like a difference between the generations, is in online schooling. Like a lot of the older professors care like about netiquette and care about how you present yourself on Zoom, while a lot of the younger professors don't really care. They like don't even care if you get out of bed or turn your camera on, which is a different, like, it's just a difference between generations, which is interesting. So then the question, the talents and strengths of managers. In my like limited experience, the managers that have always been like the best for me all kind of share these qualities. And the first one is communication. So when they have communication, they make sure everyone knows what is going on, which overall keeps everyone together a lot better. It makes sure everyone is still working towards the same goal, which I feel is very important. Another aspect that was brought up already is flexibility and understanding. So when a manager understands that there are other aspects in someone's life and that things come up, it makes it a lot easier to approach them if you need to cannot go in that day. And then flexibility obviously ties into that, because then they're able to quickly switch things around and make things work for the company. And then the last aspect that I thought was one of the most important was leadership. With strong leadership, the manager is able to bring everyone together as a team to complete the task at hand. And to me, like, I feel like a company is a team. It's all the employees working towards the same goal. It should be a team instead of just like individuals. And so having a strong leader, like having a manager with a strong sense of leadership, they're able to recognize that team, recognize the strengths and weaknesses in each team member, and bring them together and help them work together to complete the goal the most efficiently.
That's an interesting point, Haley. Thank you, because there is, in my generation, we certainly spent a lot of effort supposedly studying leadership, and what that ended up turning around to be was studying ourselves. And I'll bring that out as in some of my answers as I come through. And yes, I'm Muriel Robinette. I'm probably by far older than dirt, though Maureen was trying to. I'm a baby boomer who is now semi-retired, and in 2 weeks, I will be officially retired from GZA, Geo Environmental. No more corporate, no more corporate.
Congratulations.
No, it's a privilege, absolutely a privilege to be able to be retired. And what it's allowing me to do is I'm affiliating with a very small company called Calyx Environmental, and it's allowing me to do some advocacy and conservation work that I've always been wanting to do, and I've dabbled some, but I'm working with the Nature Conservancy and the Forest Service, and I'm doing things as a professional, but they could never afford to hire me through JZA or other corporate entities because you're too expensive. But you can do it in an advocacy position. So, and I'm still insured and all that other good stuff. So even though I'm semi-retired, I'm still going about 70 hours a week. So do not think retirement means slowing down. As a matter of fact, today I was going 50 miles an hour in my boat across Lake Winnipesaukee. So just so that you know, it doesn't mean slowing down at all. The whole, one of the questions we were supposed to answer was, what do we see about some of these different in the generations, is that I think these younger generations know how to have fun. I'm so thrilled to see all of the young professionals, the rising professionals, and these younger groups getting together for networking, and they're doing trivia night, and they're doing movie night, and they're going to go dancing, and they're going to go to the bar or whatever. And it's, the networking is, in my opinion, it seems like it's so much more fun. My generation was, we went to the professional meetings, we attended the legislative sessions, and it was all very, very formal. And you went and you met people, but it was formal. It was absolutely an extension of the office and the workplace. And I laud these younger generations that recognize that formality isn't necessary. You can really get to the heart of communications and support by having fun together. So that's something. Haley's comments about the talents and strength of a manager, obviously recognizing that she's going to probably run into quite a few managers, Haley, as you come along in your career. And soon you would be one too. And my experience in that area was that a good manager was hard to find. And part of that is because in order to be a good manager, you need to strip away your own ego. Laurel mentioned this before, as far as how our ego can really get in the way of being a talented or good manager. And my motto has always been, surround yourself with people who are smarter and better than I am. And then get out of their way, facilitate what they have to do, figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are, and facilitate their ability to do their jobs. And so a manager who unfortunately has to stand on the backs of other people or stand on the backs of the team is going to sink the team. And so that self-awareness, that ability to be neutral with yourself, so that you're actually able to clearly see these other fabulous people that we get to work with, and be part of their success by facilitating what they are trying to do, what they're stumbling through on whatever kind of a project. That's the true talent. And I really think that these younger generation, as they are very willing to just jump in, there's no hesitation, entrepreneurial. And so speaking from someone who values and needs the support of the other generations, absolutely go for it. So from Haley, from your perspective, when someone significantly older comes to you and says, whether it's the technology issue or, I'm fighting this spreadsheet and I cannot resolve this issue, or how do you feel about that? How do you deal with that?
I feel like I would just try and work them through it. Like if they don't understand it, it's just going to be beneficial for me if they understand it. So I would try and work with them and try and make sure everyone knows what's going on.
Okay, so you go into kind of like a teaching mode
Yeah.
as you work with people, and has that always been well?
Sometimes it's frustrating because, like, for example, my mom. some,
Hang on a minute. Whoa.
no, sometimes with technology, it's sometimes frustrating to try and teach her how to use it. But I mean, if I teach her how to use it, then next time she's not asking how again. And that time she's understanding.
Millie, we're frustrated too when we can't get it. You,
Back to that, Google it right away, or do you fight with it? I want to pick out the owner's manual, and there's no such thing. I was like, well, I want to go to page 8-2, and it doesn't exist. So the whole use of YouTube videos to teach yourself how to lay down flooring or troubleshoot a problem.
It's very helpful, but it's definitely like difficult to adjust to that from going from like manuals to YouTube videos. I can see how that would be very difficult for people.
I still print things out and I want to, you know, thumb through them, you know, sometimes it is difficult, no doubt, no doubt. So that's great, ladies. We're at the 1 hour mark and we have a whole nother set of questions for our panelists, but I'm almost tempted at this point because one of the things we haven't really touched on yet is strategies for how we really make sure that, you know, and Muriel did a little bit here with Haley and some of us have, but we haven't really touched on strategies for bridging the gap and specific ways that in the workplace, you know, like Brittany mentioned that revision is just so great at making sure that she doesn't feel that it's not all hierarchical. But what about a company that is, you know, what if we're sitting in a company that is hierarchical, that has an expectation that the older you are, the you know, that determines, you know, where you sit. As a young person coming into a company like that, you know, what can we do?
Run, go to a different company.
No, I don't believe that. Gina, if I can add, and it really wasn't based on age, but one of the things I did in my career, I mean, I job hopped a bit. I was restless, you know, every 3 to 4 years, I just needed to learn something new. And I was at a company, I'd been doing air pollution compliance and permitting for 20 years. And I really wanted to do something else. And it was a struggle. No one was really going to let me do that. And so what I did, I started volunteering to meet other people, to form relationships. I pretty quickly came up with a list of what I would call, you know, we often talk about mentors, but it was really advocates. Which was different than mentors, but forming relationships with people who would think of me if an opportunity came up. They'd advocate for me for doing something different. And so meeting other people, forming those relationships, understanding other, and talking to other people about these are my skill sets. What other jobs in the company use these same skill sets? And I completely ignored anybody who said I couldn't do it. Though they were not my advocates. They were on the side. And I managed, it took me a little while, but I managed to get out of that role and into a new role. But the last thing I did was I identified my replacements and I brought them to meetings uninvited. And that, I could have gotten in trouble bringing some young employee who was new in the company to the boardroom and letting him speak and me not speaking. But it worked. As soon as people started realizing, the people that wanted to hold me where I was, that there were other people in the company capable of doing what I was doing, it was easier. So, you know, that strategy of understand your talents, figure out who your allies are, find an opportunity to find your replacement. That would be, I think, my strategy.
And when you talk about, you mentioned mentoring, and one of the things that came up as we were putting this presentation together was two-way mentoring, where it's not necessarily just about, you know, an older generation mentoring a younger staff member, but there can be the reverse mentoring as well, like kind of Haley and Muriel were talking about, where, you know, there's a lot of things that younger generations can teach the older generations. Does anybody, not necessarily it doesn't necessarily need to be a panelist, but does anybody on this call have experience with any two-way mentoring?
I would actually say that my direct manager that I work with, I think she would say the same, but the two of us mentor each other daily, and she comes to me for advice, I go to her for advice, and it's very much equal playing field across, and not necessarily like one's higher than the other when we're thinking about, I guess, like where we all fall in this hierarchy of what revision looks like. But yeah, I mean, I think when you're thinking about who should be higher up and who should be managers, and what makes a good manager, I really loved what Haley was saying, and because like Haley pulled out like hard characteristics about what makes a good manager. And I wanted to circle back to that, because I think when you're talking about who should be where in a company and what the culture looks like, diversity of ages and diversity of what you look like and gender is all important, but diversity of characteristics I think is also important. And yeah, I guess I really liked the characteristics that like Haley pulled out when she was saying what makes a good manager. And I don't think you have to be the oldest generation or the youngest generation to have those characteristics.
I think sometimes exactly the opposite. I mean, I've been in a lot of engineering firms where it's, you know, let's face it, the middle-aged white male engineer who's the manager because he's the middle-aged white male, and they have no idea how to be a manager. They just, you know, here's your sticky note with your raise. Good luck.
Yeah. See you next year.
Yeah, I totally agree. Oftentimes when
If I could interject.
Yeah, Lisa, go ahead.
I think two-way mentoring is called teamwork, right? You know, we don't all know everything about everything, and that's why we build teams. And if we look at each other as peers, regardless of generation or gender or sex or anything, some people know more about certain things than others. So my younger colleagues would come to me about technical hydrogeological approaches, and I would go to them when I didn't understand, you know, some newfangled electronic device that they were using out in the field. Like, I don't know how to use it, right? That's called being a team, right? Yeah. Right? Good point. I guess it's two-way mentoring, but it's using the strengths and sharing the strengths of everybody in the team, working collaboratively together. But yeah, for those of us who've been in this industry longer than others, we all know about the middle-aged white men whose egos filled up the room, and there wasn't a lot of oxygen left for the rest of us.
Yeah.
So looking forward to, you know, great companies and opportunities that I'm hearing about where glass ceilings are being broken and people are recognizing that you're actually a more productive and more effective organization when you're getting contributions from lots of different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah, Lisa, no, I agree with you. Kirsten, you had something you were wanting to add.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it happens in engineering firms where you see someone really excel as in their engineering role. They're doing really well, and the thought is, let's promote them. They might be promoted to a management role where their skills aren't well suited for that position. So you end up losing a talented engineer and gaining a poor manager. And one, you know, piece of advice that I've gotten in my career that really stands out to me is you don't have to look a certain way or be a certain age to have responsibility. It comes down to your skill set. So rather than looking at a management position as higher than a senior engineer position, you could look at them as equal in success, but just utilizing different skill set.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Your subject matter experts aren't always your best people managers. And a lot of times they're not. And it all comes back down to that ego thing and looking at everyone's skill set and how to build the highest performing team. It all comes down to that. That's obviously one of my passions. And Mo can attest to that.
She has a way. Seriously, Shannon. I mean, that's the reality. When I look at myself, I've been a manager, I've been all sorts of things. I am more of an individual contributor. Like that's just how I am. I love to be out there. But I watch Shannon, and Shannon, like, she has this incredible team, but they all have, there's such a range of ages and
Very different.
And different skill sets, and you have this ability, and that it's really, what Haley was saying, you have certain characteristics that without them you cannot manage people. Not well.
Right.
You can manage them, but you're probably going to watch them leave too.
Unfortunately.
So I'm in awe of people who just have that ability. I manage one person, and he's older than me, so we kind of get each other. It's like, yeah, how you doing? You getting your job done? Awesome, good. I find what I love being, I'm the second oldest in the company, but it doesn't really, at least to me, it doesn't feel like it. I do feel like we have this crazy awesome team. And one of the things that really helps break down the gender, or not the gender, the generational, well, gender too, is learning a little bit about the personal side of each other. All of a sudden, like, you're not worrying about the project deadline and the next call coming up. It's here, we have people that are on rowing teams on the Charles. We have people who do marathons. We have parents with 4 kids doing homeschooling, not by choice. It's just getting to know each person. Shannon is if you don't mind me telling everyone, is a CASA volunteer. That to me is like just incredible. That tells you what kind of a person she is. But that, when you start to get to know the personal, but then you have to be willing to break down that wall too. You have to have people that are willing to share, and not all generations are as comfortable sharing. Not all genders are as comfortable sharing.
And Maureen, I want to add that not all companies welcome sharing. And so one of the things I think is really changing now that there are 5 generations in the workforce is that the younger generations, the bringing your whole self to work. There's no separation from who you are at home to who you are at work. And older generations, we were really taught to keep that separate. It was private. And so as you bring your whole self to work, you can be who you are. You can know your talents. You can know when to say no. If you're not well suited to be a manager, and that it's not your dream, you have the guts to say no, thank you, no, thank you. And I think we're going to see a lot of change in that in the next, however many years. But companies are really going to have to attract employees who agree with their values, and companies have to figure out their values, because the employees, we know our values. And if we don't, we're learning them pretty darn quickly. So finding a company that is in alignment with your values will really change, I think, the nature of the workplace. In addition to working remotely, of course, but
company cultures definitely change. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's it. Yeah.
Caitlin, go ahead, Caitlin.
Sorry, I thought what Laurel said was like a good segue to, like, you had asked about what larger companies can do to create more conversation and collaboration between the generations in the workplace. And at Eversource, we have approximately 9,000 employees across 3 states. With the acquisition of Columbia Gas, we've added about 1,000 employees in Massachusetts. Yeah. So, and being in 3 states, we have offices throughout all 3. We're pretty operations heavy within our organization. And then, so you have a wide spectrum of jobs as well. So legal, environmental, we have line workers, we have gas operations, communications professionals like Laurel and previously was, and I am now. So I think one of the things that's been really effective that a large company can do, or a small company, is we have business resource groups as part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. And the groups we have a women's business resource group, young professionals, which I'm a co-lead of, multicultural, veterans, new hire, and the groups, while the employees within those groups rally around the causes that they're passionate about, and they take those into the community as well through volunteer opportunities, like our Veterans Business Resource Group recently. We've been participating in supporting the Holiday Cards Challenge. They serve as peas greeters. They put together packages and contributions to Liberty House. So it's a great way to get your employees engaged in the community and feeling really energized around the community service side, but they also help the company with their strategic goals as well. So one example, the young professionals were tasked with assisting with a program. There was like a new program that they were launching and they needed some technical support with it. So they were having members of the group assist with the tech side and like helping people adapt to the technology. That said, I will say, I do grimace when people talk about like, oh, you know, old people can't do tech. Like that's not true at all. Like I've learned things about tech from mentors at work who were in their 60s and had a better pulse on certain things than I did. So I would say that all generations, I think it just depends on what you're comfortable with and what you like to do. But I think those business resource groups are helpful. And I think that they can be applied at smaller companies as well. To be clear, our groups, you can be any age. So we have members of all ages in the young professionals group. They're just people who are engaged and focused on attracting and retaining the next generation of employees.
Nice, great. You know, as I was prepping to moderate the session, one of the things, you know, I worked with Haley a little bit in her answer, and I listened to some things that Brittany had said about, you know, things she noticed, like the difference between professional photos that baby boomers and Gen Xers might have on their profiles versus things that younger generation, you know, the more casual pictures that really show their whole selves to the younger generations. And I started thinking about, is there a line? What is the line between formality versus professionalism? You know, right? If you were to say, because Haley had said, you know, when she was kind of practicing and we were talking about it, she goes, you know, in a more unprofessional way, you know, she goes, we present ourselves maybe a more unprofessional way. And I'm like, well, maybe a less formal way is the way of saying it. You know, there's this kind of idea that if you're unprofessional, it's, you know, a bad thing, but you know, less formality is a good thing. So is there a line? Are we blurring the line between those? And I guess I'm just really curious because I don't know. I'm curious about what, you know, other people think.
It's interesting. This is Muriel from the standpoint of I'm always aware of who I'm communicating with. And my kids tease me because I actually put punctuation in my emails. Now I've learned I don't bother to punctuate my emails to my kids, but I always punctuate them to the clients because most of my clients are older than I am, amazingly, interestingly.
But as we go through, those clients are going to become younger and we're going to have millennials that are clients. So is it going to be okay to not punctuate your emails?
Yeah, I think
I'm a millennial and I care about formality. So
Thank you, Caitlin.
I care about punctuation in my emails, in my text messages.
I
All
can't
of that.
imagine a world in which we would be punctuating our emails to our clients. I don't think I'll ever get there.
But you're a Gen Xer.
I am, but I make our youngest, I've never had an instance when my youngest, anyone in our company has sent an email that wasn't,
Yeah.
yeah.
Haley, you had
Haley.
something you were gonna say?
Yeah, Haley wants to say something here.
For me, I definitely like don't punctuate all my emails, but like if I'm emailing a professor or something like that, then I try my best to, but like it's almost second nature for me not to, because like growing up, that's how I communicated with my friends. Going on my phone, it was just so easy to be like, hey, what's up? Instead of like, hi, how are you doing? Like it was just so like informal. And so like when you're transitioning to bosses or to coworkers or professors, it's like almost hard to like retrain yourself to understand like that's how you communicate, because for like a bunch of Gen Zers, it's all like so informal because that's what we like grew up with. It's like what we're used to.
Yeah. And so anybody else have thoughts on that?
I think one way in which the pandemic has kind of caused us to look at professionalism versus formality is the nature of meetings. So everyone has a different background when you're on a video call, and for most people, it's their home. So we're still being professional, but it's certainly less formal than if you were to be sitting around a conference table, dressed up in an executive suite having the meeting. You can see, oh, someone's dog walked by, or someone's kid is stopping in to say hello, and that's their bedroom that they're sitting in, but it's certainly still professional while being less formal.
One thing that I've loved to see, so I started in the energy industry, I was 27, so that would be like 32 years ago. And women in the energy business, we dressed like men. We wore suits, really suits, like, yeah, whether they were Jones, New York, whatever, it didn't matter. They were big shoulders and not contoured, and just like we were trying to be them.
Mhm.
And the thing that I loved, I think it happened when I was like just hitting 50 or so. I was like, I don't give a crap about and I've walked in with really awesome sweaters and a pair of jeans, and now it's like, I think what's really happened with this year is, I mean, we all know, like, even the guys, they might have a polo shirt on, but they just grabbed it off of the table next to them, and if they stood up, you'd be like,
Business on the top, party on the bottom.
But I find it interesting. There was an article, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal or something, and it made me mad because it was a conversation initiated by a woman about how far do we take informal on a Zoom and everything. And I felt like writing back, like, is that really what you're caring about when you're on a Zoom meeting with someone talking about a project, talking about a problem that needs to be solved? Is it really that important that
Lisa,
someone doesn't have mascara on, or didn't do their hair in the last 2 days, or hey, I saw you wear that yesterday? Like, who cares?
Yeah, Lisa, I like your comment that you put on the chat.
I'm sorry, which one was that?
The last one about you thinking it's important to integrate authenticity into the formality, informality, professionalism.
Well, I think that as a team, you integrate better when people can recognize that you can be your authentic self and still be professional, right? And there's a balance there. Like, we don't really want to TMI. There's TMI. But I was just putting a chat in that I hadn't finished, which was like, I work as a geologist, as a hydrogeologist. Everybody else in my company is male. And because I often work in the field and often work in the office, I have very fragile fingernails. So I have a manicure every 2 weeks. and the guys in my company literally freak out if I have anything other than a French manicure. Like if I have colored fingernail polish, I have 30 years of experience as a professional hydrogeologist, but if I show up with like, holiday style manicure for the holiday week, they like go like, whoa, like, whoa, what happened to him? Like, what? Nothing happened to me. I painted my fingernails. So I think it's really interesting. And I feel it's important that we not all live behind a veil of we're all a cookie cutter, human being showing up to a job. I feel like when we feel we can share, again, not TMI, but professionally and authentically, then that allows us really to reach new levels of collaboration and trust with our colleagues. And it's only going to improve the quality of the product and the quality of the organization. But I do feel like this careful balance between informality, formality, professionalism, and being your authentic self and not hiding behind the curtains of, keeping up appearances or being like everybody else in the room.
Yeah. Well, this has been a
and
great
honestly, I feel like women, it feels easier to do that in a group of women. I feel like the traditional gender roles of women, there's a lot more latitude historical, in what women have been, who women are. We're allowed to be moms and grandmoms and nurturers and employees and professionals and volunteers and a whole lot of things. And I think traditionally men have a little bit of less latitude there. And so maybe they're feeling uncomfortable with that. But I'll tell you, these types of conversations are really helpful to me when I don't get a lot of latitude in my typical workday.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. This has been a great conversation. I thank everyone for joining us tonight. Unfortunately, it's 5:58. We've just about expended our hour and a half. I apologize to our panelists who all were given another question to prepare and didn't get a chance to do that. I guess I just kind of felt like the conversation was going to be better to really talk about strategies and just have this networking kind of opportunity and conversation. So I hope nobody's angry with me, isn't going to send me hate mail later. I appreciate all of you taking the time to do this, particularly my daughter Haley, who had her arm twisted a little bit. But you did fabulous, honey. I'm very proud of you.
Yeah.
Good job, Haley.
It's great for the resume. It's great for the resume.
Absolutely.
Now go get that paper done.
It's too
Study for that exam.
It's too late already.
If I could add one thing, because I promised Sarah that I would. So November 10th is the Rising Professionals movie night. So, all are welcome. So go on to the website. It's NEWIEE.org, right? It's
Yes.
NEWIEE.org. I'm like, let me spell it correctly. NEWIEE, NEWIEE.org. And you can see, like, you don't have to be a NEWIEE member to participate in our events. We'd love to have you become one, but just check it out. There's so many awesome women, and we hope to have a lot more of these types of conversations next year. We don't have anything for New Hampshire planned the rest of the year, but there's still a lot of things planned at NEWIEE for the rest of the year. So
yes,
check it out. And thank you to everyone. You've all been great.
It's been great. Thank you all. So
Thanks, ladies.
Great
All
job,
right.
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Hey,
bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
thanks, Deb.